Happy Wednesday as we come together for another Journey Together video this week. We are in the midst of a Holy Week that will be one like no other we have ever experienced in our lives. There will be no community Easter egg hunts. There will be no large family gatherings where we overindulge in lots of great food. And there will be no masses of people gathering in pastel colors to celebrate on Easter morning. It's going to be different. And yet, in some ways, it's going to be no different than any other week in human history. And this week, like every other, there will be some who embrace the mysterious good news that God brings life through death. And there will be others who reject that message. And still others that don't even give the message of Easter a second thought. And so what I want to invite you to consider is an opportunity that we have this week to make this an Easter Holy Week like no other by choosing how we're going to respond to that message that God brings life through death. There's an opportunity this week for that good news to go from merely head knowledge to something that is heart knowledge, something that's transforming and life-shaping for each of us. When we think about Easter and what this means, the message is still the same, but the circumstances we find ourselves in are very different. And so this week, most of us are going through different kinds of dying, different kinds of crucifixion, different kinds of loss that we are experiencing. Now, the flow of Holy Week is there's death and there's resurrection. And so the opportunity is to go, well, in these circumstances, do we really believe that God brings life out of death? Do we really believe that when the things that we value and appreciate and love are stripped away from our lives and we don't have any choice in it, do we really believe that if we have Jesus, we have all that we need? We're looking at Jesus' words in Luke chapter 9, verse 24. He says this, if you try to hang on to your life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake, will you save it? When things are stripped away, are we grasping to try to hold on to things that were normal a month ago? Or are we holding on to Jesus and letting him hold on to us and trusting him in the midst of it? Do we really believe the testimony of the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 18? He says, "For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God." Do we believe that? The cross is necessary. It strips away the things we don't need so that we can experience God's power in new ways. Or Galatians 2:20, Apostle Paul says, "I've been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me." Those verses remind us that God brings life through death, that crucifixion is a setup, it's a prelude for the glory and power of resurrection. Now, as we're considering that this week, in the midst of the hard stuff, I just want to be clear, I'm not suggesting in any way that all of the bad things that some are experiencing in this pandemic are good. They're not. They're bad. Death is a bad thing. Your job loss, your isolation, the loneliness you might be experiencing, those aren't good things. But what I am asking us to consider is, do we trust that because of Jesus' death and resurrection, that the death and dying and hardship and challenges of our lives, do we trust that those things don't get the last word because of Jesus? Do we trust that God can bring life from death, that he can bring redemption and hope and healing from darkness and discouragement and loneliness? Do we trust that if you got the call this week and you're not going to be working indefinitely, do we trust that that's not the end of the story? Do we trust that if we're feeling really lonely and isolated this week and there's no end in sight, do we trust that that's not the end of the story, that God's leading us into community, that God's doing new things? Do we trust that the bad news or the hard thing you got word about this week that has nothing to do with the pandemic, that hard thing, do we trust that because of the resurrection, that death and dying and darkness don't get the last word, but that for those who trust in Jesus, We always live with this hopeful anticipation that the best is yet to come. That's going to be my prayer for myself, for my family. It's my prayer for you this week, that this would be a Holy Week like no other, because we are trusting in the power of God to bring life from death. We are trusting in the hope of the resurrection. Now, when we gather to celebrate together on Easter morning, that's what we're going to celebrate, that good news, that God's bringing life from death, that He's bringing the resurrection into our Good Friday experiences. And I really want to encourage you to reach out to friends and family and neighbors and invite them to join us, to connect with us for our live worship on Easter morning. We'll do an 8 a.m. sunrise worship gathering. It'll be a little low-key, an Easter meditation for me and Jason leading us in some songs. And then we'll do our full Easter worship service at 10 a.m. The vast majority of people that you could invite to join with us have no plans on Easter morning. And so why not extend them the invite and let them hear the good news, to join with us in celebrating the hope of the resurrection. I look forward to connecting with you and a lot of your friends and family on Easter morning.